How would you grade the Gamecocks 2023 football season? And before I give you all my grades for offense, defense, special teams, coaching, and the overall grade as well, I actually want to go back to give you all some reference to what my grades were at the midway point, right? The halfway point, because we do our mid-season report cards every single season as well. And I think it helps to provide some context in regards to where I'm thinking, what I'm thinking, how I'm thinking, and why I'm thinking it. So, when we look back at the halfway point, South Carolina was sitting at 2-4, I believe, right at that point. I believe that was coming off the loss to the Florida Gators, right at the halfway point of the season. Either way, South Carolina, maybe off the loss to Tennessee. I could be wrong. Either way, Gamecocks were 2-4. This is how I graded this football team at the midway point. I gave South Carolina's offense a B-. They were averaging 29 points per game, 410.2 yards per game. I gave the defense a D-. They were allowing 31.3 points per game, giving up 451.5 yards per game. I gave the special teams a C+. I gave the coaching a C-. And I gave the overall grade for South Carolina at that point a D. So now we turn our attention as we look back on the 2023 football season. I'm officially locking in my grades. We'll start with the offensive side, guys. On offense, I'm going with a C-. South Carolina ended this year averaging 26 points per game, 363.1 yards per game. Obviously, the highlight of this season, there were two. Spencer Rattler at the quarterback position and what he did and what he meant to this football team. And Xavier Legette, who I think is more than likely, I think it's safe to say, this football team's MVP for the 2023 season. I also think since the midway point, Mario Anderson emerged as a consistent threat in the backfield for South Carolina. And while in comparison to some other teams, it was not much, for this Gamecocks football team that struggled mightily all season long to run the football, you have to think to yourself, where would South Carolina have been without Mario Anderson? What answers would they have found at the running back position? So I give the offense a C-. Obviously, down the stretch, the offense was not very good. And when you look back at the 2023 season, guys, admittedly, every time South Carolina played a competent defense, they got shut down for the most part. I mean, you think back every single time South Carolina played a defense that it felt like had a pulse, the Gamecocks could not do much of anything. Also, the other disappointing thing is that South Carolina opened the season in Charlotte against North Carolina, surrendered 9 sacks. The offensive line was atrocious. Sure, the numbers went down in regards to sacks per game. The unit didn't allow 9 per game. But can you realistically sit here and say that the offensive line took steps forward and got better, and this football team, this offense improved from week 1 to week 13? I don't think you can. So there were some individual bright spots, no doubt. Again, led by Spencer Rattler, over 3,000 yards passing. You had a 1,000-yard receiver in Xavier Legette. But unfortunately, Dowell Loggins' unit marred by injuries on the offensive front and marred, most importantly, by inconsistencies in regards to not being able to run the football, making the offense one-dimensional, and then the offensive line not being able to protect Spencer Rattler. That was especially felt down the stretch. So a C- for me for the Gamecocks offense. We move to the defensive side of the football. South Carolina, guys, ended the year allowing 26.3 points per game, 395.7 yards per game, which again, guys, you think about the improvement from the midway point to the end of the year, 31.3 points per game, 451.5 yards per game is where they were at. So from the midway point to end of season, points per game improved by about 5 points per game, and yards per game went down about 50 yards total, almost 60 yards total in regards to what they were allowing. Still, guys, when you look at the entire body of work, right? I gave them a D- at the halfway point. I'm willing to go up on that, but not by much. I give the Gamecocks defense in 2023 a D plus because I look at it this way. Yes, South Carolina was able to close out the season strong in games against Vandy, Kentucky, and Clemson. I challenge you, though, to look at those three offenses. I challenge you to look at the offenses of those three football teams. Taking nothing away from South Carolina, you have to factor in the entire body of work. And South Carolina as a whole, they were porous more often than they were decent in 2023. Again, I think there were some individual bright spots. Guys like Debo Williams really stepped up and emerged and became leaders. You saw guys like Tonka Hemingway, TJ Sanders at times make plays in the middle of the interior defensive line. You saw Jordan Strawn come on late in the season. You saw the secondary finally in the last couple of weeks play like most expected. Nick Emanwari with some incredible plays down the stretch. Even DQ Smith, Marcellus Dial, O'Donnell Fortune. I thought those guys shored some things up. But all in all, guys, the defense for South Carolina was a black eye. It was an eyesore. It was tough to watch. And the last three games against less than stellar offensive competition, it does not wipe away what South Carolina did on that side of the ball this season, especially when you factor in that middle chunk when the Gamecocks had 4 consecutive games where they allowed 30 or more points. And, of course, who can forget them? And, guys, we can pin it squarely on the defense. Why South Carolina is not in a bowl game. Because that loss to Florida at home at Williams-Brice Stadium that I argue, guys, completely derailed the 2023 season. It all falls on the defense. So, despite the strong finish, I give this Gamecocks defense a D+ for their performance this season. Guys, we moved to special teams. I'm giving the special teams a C. And, I think the demise of Kai Kroger was something that was maybe a little bit overplayed this year. Kai Kroger set these crazy, unrealistic expectations for himself after the way he ended last year, throwing touchdown passes and pinning Clemson at their place inside the 10 and the 5 on countless occasions. And, the way that special teams and Beamer ball impacted games in the first 2 seasons. But I think what you saw this year, guys, what was one of the main things? What was one of the main talking points that we were talking about this preseason? It was this. Can South Carolina continue to bank on takeaways and big plays in special teams to win football games? And the answer was most likely no. At some point, you have to win games in conventional ways because guess what? The other teams have coaches too. They're not going to continue to let you beat them on special teams. And I think this year we saw that neutralized. Like, Beamer ball didn't make much of an impact this year, guys. Beamer ball was not really all that alive and well this year. It did not sway games the way that we've seen it over the first 2 years of Shane Beamer's tenure. Now, that's not to say it was terrible, guys. South Carolina still had a top 25 or top 30 ranked unit nationally. They're always going to be solid. But it wasn't what fans are accustomed to seeing. I thought Mitch Jeter was really good this year. I didn't feel like South Carolina, they didn't allow anything necessarily in kickoff returns or punt returns or anything crazy like that. But it wasn't the game changer. It wasn't the facet of the game that South Carolina was able to steal. And that's what we've seen them do over the course of the Shane Beamer era, at least the first 2 years. South Carolina was not able to lean on special teams this year. Those game-changing type of plays weren't there. We saw some sloppy play on extra points, on 2-point conversions. We saw some sloppy plays on the fakes, right? A couple failed fake punts. We saw some things we weren't accustomed to seeing. And so for that reason, again, I give special teams a C. It wasn't bad, but it was just kind of there. It wasn't what we've grown accustomed to seeing in Beamer ball in Columbia. Guys, we move to coaching. And at the halfway point, I gave the coaching a C minus. I'm going to be even more harsh on coaching. I give the coaching a D. I do. And there are on-field and off-field factors that go into this. And I think y'all know where I'm going with that. When you have a season where off-field madness and what's being said in press conferences and the silliness that's taking place off of the field is the predominant storylines, that's how you know your season was, for lack of a better way of putting it, a shit show. But let's talk on field. It took this coaching staff nearly half a season to realize that Mario Anderson was the best possible option at running back. It took, in regards to identifying talent, in regards to identifying personnel, the best available options at each and every single position. In regards to defensive coaching, how long it took to make an adjustment on that side of the football. You think about situational coaching or lack thereof. The Florida game jumps out immediately. You think about South Carolina going on the road in SEC play and getting their doors blown off, looking unprepared, uninspired, not ready to compete at the highest level. I mean, it goes at every single coach on this staff. Special teams took a step back. Pete Limbo's group. Defensively, again, I've already mentioned, guys, Clayton Whiteman, we're talking about his job status right now. So it wasn't a good year. Offensively with Dowell Loggins, guys, I think Loggins did a lot of good this year in regards to Spencer Rattler, his game, revitalizing his career. Xavier Legette coming alive. Mario Anderson, finally, once he got his opportunities, was solid. But, I mean, I go into 2024 still 50-50 on Dowell Loggins. Maybe I'm 55-45. Maybe. Because I think he was an improvement over Marcus Satterfield. I think Dowell Loggins, I think the only thing that we can say with confidence about Dowell Loggins is that Dowell Loggins was an improvement over Marcus Satterfield. That's fair. Nobody is going to debate that. Nobody is going to fight that, especially when you look at what's happening with the folks in Lincoln, Nebraska right now. But that being said, I think that's all we know. I mean, guys, when you talk about personnel, you look at some of the play calling down the stretch and just some of the questionable play calls, the questionable personnel usage. I think the jury's still out on Dowell Loggins. And then Shane Beamer being the leader of this football team, being the leader of this football program. And, it's unfortunate for Beamer because I think the thing that makes people, not just locally, but nationally, love Shane Beamer, it's his energy, it's his emotion, it's the wearing his heart on his sleeve. It's he's so great in pressers when South Carolina wins football games. But I think what we saw this year was the ugly side of it. When things aren't going well, we saw the opposite. We saw Shane Beamer, and we saw this in the upstate too, by the way. Let's not excuse, he's not the only one. I want to make that very clear, but we're talking about South Carolina here. But we saw on a weekly basis things that Shane Beamer had said make the biggest headlines. We saw those things add fuel to the fire from the national perspective. And guys, I mentioned this yesterday, and I will not stutter when I say it. Shane Beamer hurt his brand as a head football coach this year. There is no question in my mind. Because when people think about from outside of South Carolina, from the SEC-wide perspective, the national perspective, when they think about Shane Beamer in 2023 and Gamecocks football, you know what people's only takeaway is? God, that dude said some crazy stuff. Remember when he broke his foot? That's all they're going to think about. So I think Shane Beamer could have done a much better job of leading this football team through treacherous waters. Certainly, I'll give him credit for keeping this team positive, keeping them, at least motivated enough to beat Jacksonville State and then Vandy. Then, of course, Kentucky. That was the best win of the season, obviously. So at least being excited about showing up in an era where guys are checking out and hitting the portal and 1 foot out the door. South Carolina at 2-6, they could have mailed it in. And they didn't. So give credit where credit's due. But the entire body of work, everything was an issue in 2023. That includes coaching. That's why I give the coaching a D grade. And we move to, guys, the overall grade. Let me preface it by saying this. Guys, so many people go, okay, well, if I average this, and this, then this should be the overall grade. That's not necessarily how this works, because there are intangibles. There are things that I factor in that, it's just not an average. That's not how it works, okay? That's not how it works. So I want to make that very clear. And my overall grade at the halfway point, guys, was a D. 2-4 at that point, right? I think you had just lost the game to Florida. Nothing had gone well. Well, I don't think you guys are going to be very surprised by this. My overall grade for Gamecocks football for the 2023 season is an F. It's an F. 5-7 overall, 2-6 in SEC play, and a season, guys, in which, as I mentioned, the off-the-field stories, the off-the-field nonsense outweighed any of the on-field successes. Truly. That's where we are. I mentioned this yesterday, but the things that I'll remember the most from the 2023 season, Dakereon Joyner telling me to shut the F up, Shane Beamer breaking his foot in frustration after the Florida game, Beamer attacking not attacking, but mentioning the chain gang eating hot dogs as that was the biggest problem of tonight. That was the most disappointing thing. Telling folks to find some joy after the Jacksonville State game and mentioning folks have a miserable existence and attacking those in the fan base because people may not be all that thrilled with how the JSU game went. I mean, the list goes on and on, guys. The list just goes on and on. And so it was a nightmare year 3. I mean, let nobody tell you different, guys. It was a nightmare year 3. When you think about all the expectations, guys, if I would have predicted 5-7, like our friend Jake Crane did, who, by the way, guys, he's coming for blood on Friday. He's already told me. But if I would have picked that, oh my goodness, the attacks I would have received, the shots I would have taken from Gamecock Nation. So many out there were picking 8, 9, 10-win seasons, ignoring all of the deficiencies and real question marks the football team had. And all of those things blew up in South Carolina's face this year. Misses in the portal, misses in recruiting, not building the roster the way this coaching staff should have through the transfer portal. And so it was a nightmare season from start to end. I mean, there's just no other way to put it, guys. And when you think about the importance of, we talked about it all summer, all preseason, year 3, this is year 3. It's a really big year. Year 3 is massively important for a head coach. Year 3 is kind of the year you start figuring out what you got. It couldn't have gone any worse. It couldn't have gone any worse. There are positives. I'm not going to say there's zero positives, but they're few and far in between. And the negatives so greatly outweigh them that it makes speaking on those positives, it makes me feel somewhat foolish, because the bottom line is this: you failed. You failed in 2023. You failed in year 3 of Shane Beamer. That's it. South Carolina may not have very high expectations and high standards, but guys, you miss a bowl game with Spencer Rattler at quarterback, you failed. You failed. So my overall grade, guys, for South Carolina football in 2023 is an F. Maybe that F stands for find some joy. But either way, it is an F. And South Carolina and Shane Beamer begin now picking up the pieces and rebuilding to right the ship in 2024.